Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Steve Van Eierstein. Thank y'all for joining me again today as we go through and we review the fourth chapter of the book we are currently going through. And that book is I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. Let me back that up a little bit. Can you see it? There we go. There we go. Get it in the light. And it's been a fantastic journey so far with this author. I really appreciate how he's breaking down the stages of belief. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. You can also get a reprint of this book by Twiceborn Books for Twiceborn people. It is called Believing in False Gods. I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. This is how it looks. It's just literally reprints of the pages scanned in pretty much. So I am looking forward to it. I really have found a lot just going through this book again. It touches on a lot of areas of development, whether in my spiritual journey and my recovery and my life in general. So I'm looking forward to reviewing this chapter with y'all. So let's get into it. Push this down a little bit. And here we go. This is the review of Chapter 4 of V.C. Kitchen's I Was a Pagan. Chapter 4, this business of making character, it is in quotes. Then the subtitle is Science. All right, so I like the title of this chapter just to start off with because it puts this business of making character in quotes, like it gives you a little bit of foreshadowing as to how this is going to go, right? Because this is the only one that actually gets put in quotes, I believe. Oh, no, there's one more that gets put in quotes, but it's this it gives an indication of its false presentation almost. So I appreciate it. And right off the bat, he talks about how the finding of schools of philosophy offered nothing but the endless merry-go-round of sterile thinking and futile debate, finding the church had either ceased to have effective message or had lost the art of passing it on. I, like so many of this age, turned to the school of science. So he's exhausted his current sources of knowledge, right? He's gone through the things he knows of, and that's just a recounting of the steps he's taking, right? Like, so he's gone to the church. He's philosophically. Also, we've gone through the physical pursuit of meaning and purpose, and none of them fails, or all of them failed. So he's this next stage of seeking, and he wants to go in, and he needed to find what he talks about here as a spiritual ray to stimulate my dormant soul, which I love the way he puts that in context and he phrases that, because that spiritual ray that to stimulate my dormant soul. For those in 12-step recovery, the concept of a spiritual awakening as written through recovery everywhere and every type of recovery. And that's the moral awakening that he's talking about here. So that stimulate my dormant soul. Pretty interesting choice of words. So I have this next part marked out to read, and I think it's important because a lot of us have gone on this pursuit, and he talks about an idea that is very much foundational stone to recovery here. So it occurred to me, for instance, that sunlight could not penetrate a dense body, that the rays from a learned brain might not penetrate a dense mind, and that perhaps a spiritual light, if any such thing existed, because remember he's still seeking here, could not penetrate a dense character. Right? My pagan nature was perhaps too coarse, too sullied, selfish, and sinful to be sensitive to any spiritual environment or to let this light of truth shine through. I could see more, I believed, if somehow I could clear myself up much as I would clean a dirty window. Now, again, because it's my background and my experience, I'm going to talk about a little bit of this cleaning process, right? And later on, he said, I would still have to undertake a course of self-improvement, right? What we're talking about here, and this is something that James Allen talks about, this is something that Emmett Fox talked about, right? We have to begin to clear out the baggage. We have to begin to get rid of whatever has been blocking us from the sunlight of the spirit, right? That's what it's called in a lot of 12-step rooms, recovery rooms, and actually get out of our own way. You hear that a lot in just spiritual conversations, or just psychological conversations too. And just living, right? We talk about our own stubbornness, our own inability to change our position because of our egos and our pride and all of these things, right? And we're so convinced of our own opinions, but those are the things that stand in the way between us and growing spiritually. And that's a thought that he's having right here. And as we see as we go through this chapter, he doesn't necessarily go about it in the right way, but it's a step in the right direction, right? It's a step in understanding that, hey, what's going on is I just might not be available to receive that yet. I might not be available to connect with these type of things yet, right? And that's an important realization to come to, right? Like, if you think everything's fine and you should just be able to grow in these ways, but you have a full life and you're committed to it and you're not willing to change it all, like the saying is, nothing changes if nothing changes. Keep doing the same thing, you're going to get the same results. There's a whole bunch of versions of that. So when we talk about this stuff, and we in 12-step recovery, NAAA primarily, and those and the substance recovery, it's called letting in the sunlight of the spirit. And there's a saying that says, trust God, clean house. And it's interesting because he's talking about, remember, this was written in 1934. So this is before the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous came out. This was from the influenced by the Oxford group. And so to hear this as a house cleaning is interesting because it preceded what we now know. Though a lot of the ideas that were written into this book were a lot of the ideas that Bill and Bob took to write their program of recovery. So very cool stuff to me, just to see the parallels and to see how important it is to actually, or how many ways it's come to the understanding that you have to remove yourself. You have to get yourself out of the way. You have to allow for more space in your life to have this strength and these new ideas, right? And this new connection that we're seeking. If we keep filling ourselves with the same, it's not going to work out. So the next thing he talks about is, first step is clearing oneself up. The first step in clearing oneself up, I thought, was, and especially in clearing up society, was to clean up one's physical surroundings, which I do think is important, right? Like how you live, what you live in, can have an impact on how you think. There's a lot of people talking about make your bed in the morning. There's a lot of people talking about just clean your house, take care of your own house, learn to take care of yourself, then take care of your family, then you can take care of your household and your community, and then bigger and better things, right? But you have to start here. You have to start right where you're at, right? And James Allen talks about this. I think it was Emmett Fox also talked about it. We beg for more responsibility without being able to manage the responsibility we already have. If we can't conduct ourselves in a healthy way with the responsibility and the resources that we have already, who are we to demand more, right? So this first step that he kind of talks about here in clearing oneself up was to clean one's physical surroundings, right? And he talks about if you're born into a healthier environment, you have a better chance of moving forward. And I do believe science has proven that when we talk about ACE factors, which are those adverse childhood experiences, and how much they have an impact on a child's development, and how much that has an impact on mental health and substance use going forward. And the source of that can be debated, whether it's just well, it could be a lot of things, socioeconomic, genetic, things like that, that just kind of feed into the development of those circumstances. But it's important to understand that a healthier environment breeds healthier thinking and action. And there's science backing that as well. So he also touches on something in this chapter, which he later will, I'm going to just to make sure I state this clearly. I'm going to read the sentence, but sociological control of the environment supplemented, if possible, by eugenic control of the seed itself would be the first requirements in my scientific course of soul culture. So he's talking about cleaning up the environment that you're immediately around, right? But he also touches on this idea of eugenics, which, remember, this is before World War II that this was written. Now, and the way he uses it would be his intention to foster a new idea or a new environment for people to be raised in healthy environments, and it gets. But it has a very bad reputation. That word has a very bad reputation, and usually rightfully so, because it's misused. But he did mention that in here, and like I said later on, he talks about how it fails. Because it's not a practical idea. It doesn't work in the sense of what it costs to actually practice a eugenic ideal, right? It's a very dark idea, to be honest with you, when you run it all the way down. This is him right now trying to come up with a process to best foster spiritual connection, and it just is a little scary that a word like that gets thrown in sometimes. But to be fair, that part he does see the error of that concept later on, which I was grateful for, because it's a little scary of a thought, because it's definitely been taken and ran with in all the wrong directions. So so that was his first step, right? So sociological control of the environment, so controlling the environment we're in, like the actual place that we exist in, that we live in, and how we live, was important. And then he was giving a thought to eugenics as well. That was his first step. The growing principle as well, I believe, should be strongly stimulated. So this is going into his second step of what he thinks should be focused on for spiritual growth, right? Because that's what he's trying to use, science and all of these things, to actually foster a spiritual environment to grow in. So he's talking about controlling your physical environment, controlling almost reproduction, and who gets to connect. It's a very scary idea. But now he's talking about how the spiritual life needs to also be stimulated, and it has to have some encouragement to actually be brought about. So the growing principle as well should be strongly stimulated. And he says that should be strongly stimulated through good books, good schools, good churches, and good men, right? So fellowship amongst people, whether that be at church, at schools, also literature, right? And then through God as well. Good churches, that kind of a thing. And that we find that today also, that some of the best spiritual growth we get is the interaction with those who have already walked the path ahead of us, and those who have grown in the ways that we desire to grow in. So that fellowship and example is very important. So he goes on to talk about how because at this point too, there's the Oxford group, and then there's a bunch of people started writing these self-help books, and a lot of it were based around, like I said, James Allen is still called the father of self-help. He was one of the first people to write a self-help book, and that was As a Man Thinketh, which you can listen to my entire interaction and review of in the on this channel on a As a Man Thinketh playlist. So I encourage you to check that out. It's very powerful book, and I love that book. But he talks about this book called How to Succeed. And it would say, set a goal, desire it with all your heart, work towards it with all your energy. So commitment to an actual goal. So he would have to actually pick a goal, and from his previous experience with looking up morality, remember, he found that there was only one person that could actually practice the philosophical and moral teachings, and that was Jesus Christ. So he said he set his ideal and his example to be Jesus Christ from the Bible. So he wants to grow in Christ-like character. And he says that here on page 52, in order to grow in a direction of a Christ-like character, right? So he's got his first step, which is the environmental and sociological controls. And now the next step is let me see here, spiritual inspiration and striving, right? So we've got striving for Christ-like character through these venues of good fellowship, a church, a school, good books, and also God. And to get this Christ-like character, I like how he, and this is, if we remember back to James Allen, there's a part about ideal, and this is the same thing that he talks about here, is selecting this ideal that we want to strive for. So he goes on next to describe the change that needs to occur. That he just realized what needs to change for himself when he selects a Christ-like character to pursue. And he goes, this called I could see for a very considerable stride from a nature ruled to a large degree as mine was by lusts and selfishness and jealousies and hates. So all of these selfish, self-serving, self-centered ideas and concepts, that's what runs him right now. To a nature lighted up by love, charity, and kindness, right? That's quite a shift. To be others-centered, to be driven by love instead of self and fear. Very different things. And he realizes this is quite a large jump. Despite the emergent possibilities of evolution, this new character, I felt it represented too big of a jump to pop into existence full born. So it doesn't just, he was saying he doesn't believe it can just happen like that. Someone changes their character. And it's been my when we think about that too, William James, variety of religious experiences. Some people, it does happen for some people. It's been documented that it happens for some people that suddenly they're just wholly a whole new person in just a moment. But a lot more people have the educational variety, and that's been my personal experience, is the educational variety. So I like how he brings that in here. So this he had to figure out a process to do this, and even with the sudden turns of character, he figured that there was a process of leading up to this sudden change. So there's a certain, what's he described? A boiling point was reached. So it was building, and then suddenly he had this motivation and this experience that changed him entirely. So it's not a out of the blue conversion. It's usually got some build up to it, which I'll agree with too. So, but given that it's a process, he wants to use what in this process? So he's figured out the first step is the environmental, sociological control. Now we need spiritual inspiration and a spiritual idea to strive for. That's 2. 3 is this 3? I believe so. Actually 3 was the understanding of like it needs to be gradual and done in steps, right? So the whole process, I believe, could be greatly aided and sped up, right, by our modern knowledge of psychology. So yeah, so 2 was the ideal and all of this, and 3 was understanding it was going to be a gradual process, that was going to be a cumulative process by effort and change. Then 4 The fourth step in his idea here is to use psychology that was relatively new in understanding at the time to help funnel us towards a spiritual way of living, which is interesting because I feel like that's what psychology still tries to do today. And he uses some interesting terminology. He uses the sublimation of the libido, um, the explosive power of higher affection. He uses words and terminology highly associated with Freud's version of psychotherapy. Well, one of the founding fathers of psychotherapy, of course. And Freud founded psychoanalysis, excuse me. And that's what he's referring to here with his connotations and the language he uses. He's going off of that from all I can tell. And he says that these scientific psychological processes give belief and validity to his thought that it could help, right? Change these lustful, jealous, hateful, selfish thoughts, sublimate them, these ideals of the libido into something different, into a higher cause and a higher purpose. And that's where he goes. So that was his 4 steps. The other methods applied psychology would aid in the climb from. I like this. I think this is a very good way to explain this. So the process that he's kind of coming through, this is the goal, to climb from mere selfish consciousness, so selfish self-centeredness, through the stage of social consciousness, right? Because a lot of people get stuck here. This is where humanism sits. This is, I am here to serve society as a whole and only society. And which largely sounds like a good idea, but it has its failings, right? It loses its humanity at the end of the day because it starts treating human beings as just cattle for society. And then up through the sublime God consciousness of man in the spirit, which might prove to be the most real one of all, right? So this is the stages of consciousness that he believes he himself needs to progress through, that he needs help progressing through, and also what he wants to present to allow other people to help progress through it, right? So I'm going to read this a little bit. In short, my whole scheme reduced itself to the following formula. I was to raise myself and the rest of the world with me from the existing chaotic state of egoism. So just selfish and self-centeredness all over the place, which it's still true today, through the higher but equally futile plan of humanism. So he's recognizing that humanism isn't where we're supposed to land, but we need to go there first before we go to the next step, right? These are stages. These are the singular jumps are unlikely, right? So to humanism, into the highest and only creative plan of theism, service of God, passing as we went through the 3 evolutionary stages of self-consciousness, social consciousness, and God consciousness. Again, so we're going from thought of self, then we're talking about the thought of society, then thought of God, service to a power greater than ourselves, service to a God of our understanding, something that is beyond human nature. This clarification or evolution or growth would be accomplished by, okay, so this is where he actually defines his plan. And I do have to say this as well. So I believe in his summation of the process, right? It's been my own experience that, yes, I was a very selfish and self-serving person that led me down a very dark path. And then what got me started was to be of service to those directly around me, to be of service to a 12-step fellowship, to help other human beings. And then after getting there, I found a God of my understanding. I found clarity, and I found a higher, more meaningful, maybe a better way to say it, cause in serving that God in my understanding. which then therefore still served my fellow man, which then therefore still served my friends and family and those that I didn't even know, right? So to be of service to this God of my understanding, or this higher nature, this source, or whatever it is, puts us in a position to actually be of service to those around us, which is a beautiful thing. So I do believe that that progression of self to social to God is appropriate, and it is accurate, because that's how my experience went. And it was a long experience, hard fought experience for me, because I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know that's even where I was going, actually. So, I agree with that part. And I like how we get to see the formation of this man's ideas. I like how we get to see the effort he's putting into actually growing spiritually and trying to develop this spiritual life. So he summarizes his plan right here, which is preparation through eugenic control of stock and social control of environment. Remember, we talked about that. Eugenic control, terrible idea. He figures it out, though. 2, stimulation through books, school, churches, men, and especially through the high example, of Jesus of Nazareth. So we have the spiritual stimulation through multiple venues and through an ideal we're striving for. Then 3, progress from the present stages through gradual evolutionary steps. So slow forward progress. And then 4, acceleration through the methods of applied psychology. And reality of it, except for the eugenics thing, it seems like a good idea. And even to some, some might even agree with the eugenics thing, which still scares me that people have that style of thinking. But it's real and it's out there. So that's his plan, though. Progress through the stages of self, social, to finally the stage of God consciousness. Through these 4 steps of social and environmental control, inspirational, spiritual control, and ideal, striving towards an ideal, through evolutionary small steps, and then finally to speed up the process through psychological achievement and scientific knowledge. Right? So, decent plan. And I got to read this next page because he's kind of laughing at his own arrogance. Not the whole page, just the next paragraph. It seemed, on the whole, a sensible and effective program. He was very proud of himself. The great mind of a certain V.C. Kitchen, advertising man, I thought, was now attaining something where the comparatively feeble minds of philosophers, ecclesiastics, and scientists had failed. His grandiosity is showing up here, and intentionally so. I know he's saying it in a sarcastic, humbling way, and it's just funny. And he states it in that way on purpose, right? Like thinking that he's developed this ultimate plan all by himself that's going to effectively lift up himself and the whole world, and he's going to be the savior of the whole world, right? So now let's go into what he reads about this, or what he read about what he thinks about this after actual application and further reflection. And then because he came up with this whole thing, right? That what this whole first half of this chapter was, and now he's going to reflect on it, and he says this: after a little reflection, however, the plan did not seem quite so excellent. Right out the gate. Didn't say I tried it, had this effect. No, he just said, actually, this might not be a great idea. It would take many years and far more than my paltry powers to convince the world it should adopt eugenic and sociological control. Such remote control, even if applied, might benefit my great-great-grandchildren, but it could scarcely be used to help me apply philosophy today. Right? So he's saying, like, this is so far out of reach to actually apply this, and I will add, it's not mentioned in this, but apply it in a healthy way, if that's even possible, that it's not practical to even try to entertain that as a step. But also, he wants to be able to have a different life today. That even if the eugenic control could be morally worked out in a proper way and followed effectively and agreed upon by everybody, so like non-existent chance of that happening, it might help 3 to 5 generations down the line. But for those today who want to find that spiritual experience, it has no effect and it does not help. So it's a failed point. It's a moot point. There's no reason for it. So he wants to learn how to live his life now. When, moreover, I came to apply the stimulating influence of Christ's example, nothing more resulting than before. So he's found an error in his first step, the eugenic control. I think the environmental control, like make your bed, take care of your household, take care of yourself, all of these physical things, very important. Good stuff. Helped my mental health, helped me figure out where I'm progressing to, and or gave me a foundation to feel like I could progress in life, that I could change something, right? Because just those small actions provide a opportunity to live differently. So, but now he's on to his second step. So he's talking about the application of the ideal of Jesus Christ, right? The fact that I knew Jesus to be honest and loving and unselfish and pure did not make me honest or loving or unselfish or pure, right? What a concept. He sat there and he said, we picked an ideal, right? But me saying I want that to be like that ideal really didn't do anything, right? The truth is that deep down, I did not even want to be like him. I did not even want to be. And I could not, therefore, follow the advice of success books. I had set a goal. I did not desire, but while I had set a goal, I did not desire it with all my heart. And failing this, I could not work towards it with all my energy. So he's saying right here, you can, if you want to be like Michael Jordan, you want to be one of the greatest basketball players of all time, you choose him because of the characteristics he embodies, but do you actually want to do that? Like inspirational speakers today will talk about this. Like, you have to understand, if you actually want to do this, it comes with sacrifice. It comes with a lot of choices you have to make. You can't just look at something and think it's going to happen for you. If you do not desire it, if you do not desire those qualities for yourself with all your heart, meaning you have to give up your old self, then you're going to have a problem. And that's what he's running into. Jesus' moral and spiritual qualities were admirable, very admirable indeed. But the only things I seemed to desire with all my heart, were to be left largely alone, to find plenty of cocktails when I got home at night, and somehow to fall heir to about $20 million. Right? So only things he really wanted were selfish and self-centered things, to have his material and physical desires fulfilled at all times, right? Like he saw these ideals and these moral qualities of Jesus, and he thought they were great and admirable, but he couldn't get over himself and his own selfish desires. How could I grow from these desires into Jesus' way of rising above material matters? So he found a new question, right? He found a new question he needed to ask himself. How do I start to desire to be like Jesus, to have Christ-like and righteous character? All right? And then he talks a little bit about Dante and how Dante describes this application of, or not this application, but this evolutionary process of physical desire, right? Like you just want this, and then you want more, and then more and more and more. And we're always looking for that fulfillment and satisfaction in the next great thing. When we get it, when we achieve it, we have a mere temporary sense of pleasure or fulfillment, and then we're on to the next thing, right? And this happens because in none of these does she find that she is seeking and trusts to find it further on, right? So we're keeping on looking for the next greatest thing, seeking through the material, I have denoted. And then he talks about his own personal experience with it too. Remember that first chapter was about the 5 P's, but having chased my pleasure and possessions and power and position and applause, in none of which I had found what I was seeking, and then seeming to see a greater good in philosophy, and then the possibilities of the church, and then in science, and still not finding what I sought, what should my next step be? Right? I have tried seeking in all of these areas of my life. I have tried to find this spiritual connection and understanding and this sense of fulfillment and love, really, in all of these areas. But where do I go next? Right? What is my next step? There was still, of course, a further step in science. I had as yet applied no psychology, and men said psychologists could sublimate their desires and expel their baser aims through the power of higher affection. And so he talks about how psychology, okay, well, we're going to try step 4 still, right? So step 1 didn't work because eugenic control is just bogus. Step 2, Christ is a great ideal, but if I don't want to be like him and I'm just choosing it because I think I should choose it, right? And I don't have any motivation to change my pursuit of physical pleasure and fulfillment that way. That's not going to work. So that's step 2 failed. The evolutionary process, right, is failed as well. In the planes of seeking, he's done. And so he's going to try psychology again, right? And, well, we're going to talk about it at least, right? He talks about a friend that went to a psychologist for a cure. That's what he said. He wanted to quit drinking. He talked about an alcoholic that wanted to quit drinking. And when he did it, he actually phrased it? Went through a psychological cure for drinking. It did not last, and the psychologist excused himself by saying that the patient did not really want to stop drinking. I mean, a lot of people in recovery, I've seen that happen. People think it's a great idea to stop drinking, but they don't actually want to. And they keep going in and out, and they keep saying that they want to change, but the reality of it is they don't. They don't see a better life for themselves without drinking. And he talks about that, right? He said the psychologist tried to get him interested in something else to actually find fun and fulfillment. But try to convince a man whose fun is alcoholic and who finds expression in dancing on a table. He references dancing on a table often in this book. I think that's odd, or at least in these first couple of chapters. I'm not sure why he likes dancing on tables, but do whatever you want. That he will find greater fun in going dry combined with stamp collecting. And as in the case of the friend I mentioned, you will find that he very soon falls off the wagon. In his whole bag of tricks, the psychologist has no high affection to compare with the alcoholic's love for alcohol, nor in most cases the ordinary man's plain love of self, right? So I love that he brought that in there because I believe he is an alcoholic. But these principles and this growth and this understanding is very important and true and needed for everybody. And whether it's a man, like I was a person that abused many substances. I was an alcoholic, heroin addict, cocaine addict. And regardless of that, though, like not everyone has to be abusing substances. That's what I fell in love with because it did something for me, right? I needed that fulfillment from those things, or I needed that release or that numbness or whatever you want to call it from those things, so I could actually do what I thought I needed to do, right? It was a love of self at the root of all of it, selfish and self-centered. And even though not every human being has the same manifestation of the problem that I had, everybody needs this. The ordinary man's plain love of self, right? Like we cannot convince somebody that they need to change how they're living, right? We cannot convince somebody of that needs to be chosen, is what I've found. People need to choose to let go of their old way of life, sacrifice their old way of living in hopes to find something different, right? And we can't make someone do that. A lot of people think they can convince somebody or punish them into it or this, or convince them, beg with them, plead with them to see the better way. But all of those things are a lost cause if someone doesn't choose to actually acknowledge them and be in them. So we cannot convince people of the change. We are not willing to give up our selfish loves. And there's a lot of people that aren't willing to give up what they find enjoyable or what they think is enjoyable to them. And they make that their whole goal. Those are the 5 P's that he talks about constantly here. So he talks about, continuing to talk about psychologists. They lack the genius to change the pagan's deep conviction that it's no fun to be good unless they found a way to put their subjects in conscious touch with God. So he's saying this is not a man-made thing that needs to happen, not a man-made change that needs to happen. And I understand this because this is exactly how I thought. Like, following these rules and these restrictions and the way this life presents is not anything that sounds like it's going to be pleasurable or fun or give me what I feel like I need out of this world. So why would I pursue it? And he says here, unless they have found a way to put their subjects in conscious touch with God. God is the only way. The God of your understanding, the power greater than yourself, whatever you call it, source, universe, energy. There's a lot of the labels out there for it. Well, getting in touch with that God is what the key is to actually sacrificing that selfish love. So he talks about how his own trials have failed, his own efforts have failed to help people. And he said, I presented all these good ideas without first convincing readers on the idea of wanting to take the cure. You should live to grow a soul. You should live to be a godly man. You should have godlike character, righteous character. You should all of these things. It would help in these ways and and like your marriage would be better because of this. Your life would be better because of this. Politics would be better because of this, right? Like he wrote all these articles, but he didn't actually make it seem or give them a reason for wanting the cure, wanting to take the cure. He gave no reason to change the way they're living, right? Like, it's a good idea objectively, right? But what is, it's like the question almost, what is in it for you? And that's the hardest question for people to answer, right? And he talks about that he was a advertiser, right? And today it's actually quite well known, almost to a fault, that people need incentive to do anything. We're very selfish, and we need to almost cloak service in the veil of selfish satisfaction before we can actually have an experience with it and realize that's not what it's about at all, but it's worth so much more, right? So he didn't know how to connect people to this spiritual realm and to this God that he believed needed to be connected with. So, but since I myself did not know how to put them in touch with God's approval, I could not infect them with the pleasure of this act. Since I myself, moreover, did not know the pleasure of God's approval, I myself did not look forward to being good with any great zest. Why should I follow these rules? Why should I embody this Christ-like character? There's no reason for it, because I don't think it's going to serve me well. I could see that growing a soul in God's service is something that I ought to live for. It seems like a great idea, but it is not as yet what I wanted to live for. I'll do that later on. I'll figure that out later. I remember telling myself these things so often that I'll figure that out later. Right now, this is just what I'm going to do because it's what I want to do. And I know that's what I should be doing, but I don't know how to change it to wanting to do that. So he references again that science doesn't tell us how to get in touch with the spiritual environment, and that how science is involved with this world of form, which is this physical world of physical objects and material, and how science is preoccupied with that rather than a spiritual realm. And he compares it to say, hey, science has not begun to explore in the world of significance, saying that the real significant world is a spiritual world, not this material world. Though there's plenty to be learned and understood, the real thing to explore is this spiritual realm. And then he says someday they must and will find the existence of a spiritual domain. Like, it's bound and it's to happen. It's inevitable that it's going to happen, that kind of stuff. So I like this quote at the that he stated from Charles Steinmetz at the end. He said, the next great discoveries will lie in the domain of the spiritual. And I think we're actually finding that now. I think we're on the cusp of it, or we're actually there. More people are finding the power of meditation. They're finding the power of connection. They're finding the power of alignment with this power greater than yourself. There's so much more to understand and be a part of, I think. I'm not a person to sit here and lecture on all of those understandings or explorations, but I can tell you there's more and more being understood about the soul and the mind and the body connection and just the energy of this world and this universe. And I think that's amazing. And I think we really are working towards this domain of spiritual discovery. I'm looking forward. And then he says, well, though that might be true that we're on the way, it doesn't help me now. How do I connect? That could scarcely, he says this, the phrasing, that could scarcely come to pass in time to start me growing my own soul. Can't rely on science. It's too far behind, really. It's not making enough progress. So I'm going to read the last two very small paragraphs here, because I think they're very important, especially to today's political environment, societal environment, everything going on today. While science theorizes about future generations, the present civilization makes speedily for chaos. When I realized all this, I began to see that until I myself was straightened out, until I had solved the problems of my own life, there was really nothing I could do to unravel the tangles of the other fellow. And that's how it ends, right? So think about that for the world today. How many of us, science is trying to catch up to where we need it to be, right? We say science has become so advanced, but the reality of it is science is always behind nature. So it's never really advanced that the connotation of that word gives. It's always behind. We're just rediscovering what's already there. Isn't that amazing? Like, science has advanced so much, but we're just catching up to God and nature, which is interesting to me. But as we're trying to catch up, this world is sitting in a selfish and self-centered chaos that is just bleeding over into all areas of life. And I do believe in some levels it will get pulled out of. Sometimes it has to get worse before it gets better. I don't know what that will look like by any means. But I can tell you from my own personal journey of recovery, it had to get much worse before I got better. I had to come to the point of self-destruction before I was willing to change who I was and how I lived. So for those in 12-step recovery, the world might be going through a really hard first step. But it's all in the progress and forward motion if we let it be. And I think that's important. So, and until then, what we can focus on primarily is ourselves. I think our problems will be resolved more readily and speedily if we all focused on getting ourselves in line and right. A lot of us like to distract ourselves from our own problems by trying to solve the problems of others, and not that, but it's a false presentation, right? Like, I want to feel good about something, so I'm going to help somebody else instead of actually addressing the problems that I've got going on in my own life. I guarantee you that might work for a little bit, but it won't hold, right? Eventually, you'll become reliant on helping other people, and it'll become a sickness for you as well. I've seen it happen, and it's unfortunate. So I want to say this: if you focus on getting your own house in order and to be of service to the family members and the friends that you have, and to be loving and kind to them, and to straighten yourself out morally and spiritually and physically and mentally, emotionally, all of these planes that we exist on, really, if you focus on that, if everyone focused on that, we would get well from a very rock solid foundation and then move forward. And I believe that. So, and we can't truly help others until we can help ourselves, right? I wrote this: can't give away something you haven't got. You have to do the work before you actually give it away. Because if you don't even know how to actually help somebody. So we need to focus on our own healing. Then after that, we can be of service to those around us. So, fantastic chapter. The next chapter is called The Business of the Supernatural. I don't remember what that chapter is about, so I'm going to look forward to reading it for you next week. And this was a great, great chapter. I know this recording went a little bit longer than usual. Forgive me for that. But there was a lot of great stuff in this chapter. Just a man trying to find his own way here, guys, and just trying to figure out a process to actually grow spiritually. And I believe today we've gotten a lot of different opportunities to figure that out. So I'm happy to be where we are today. But it's a privilege that this man went through and told us about his journey trying to find it. So I recommend everybody to get the book, read it for yourself, make your own highlights, make your own observations. Tell me I'm wrong. I'm fine with that. Let's have a conversation about it. And please go ahead, subscribe, like the channel. I've got the Facebook page as well, and I will be looking forward to hearing from y'all. So next week, we'll do chapter 5, the reading. So until next time, thanks.